So I'll just, before we move on from the quality of the standards, I will tell you that Sandra Stotsky was very disappointed because we actually made them worse. And as she said, one of the big changes that Governor Pence and others should be most ashamed of is that some of the good things she fought for in Common Core were actually removed. So for example, there's a standard, analyze 17th, 18th, and 19th century foundational U.S. documents of historical and literary significance, including the Declaration of Independence, the preamble of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and Lincoln's second inaugural address for their themes, purposes, and rhetorical features. Now, in our paraphrasing, in our attempt to make it our own, we changed that, and she took out all references to those documents, and we rewrote it this way. Analyze and synthesize foundational U.S. and world documents of historical and literary significance for their themes, purposes, and rhetorical features. And the same thing occurred, where they had tried to specify great works of literature from Britain and American literature from certain centuries. That was also basically diluted, essentially. So that was a shame. And so that's where we are. But the one question that I think needs to still be answered, because I've had a lot of people pose it to me, is, well, it's a shame it turned out that way, but was federalism restored? I mean, technically, we brought them back here, we went through this Hoosier process, and so we need to look at the integrity of that process, in my mind, to really decide if indeed true federalism was restored when it came to Common Core in the state of Indiana. So we need to ask ourselves a few questions, and the first thing that came to our mind that was a concern was when we noticed that it started to look like it was going to be a stacked deck. Right out of the gate, when Ms. Susie Shin from West Ed, the quasi-governmental, federally funded, heavily Gates-funded organization that profits off of Common Core, was brought to the state of Indiana. She lives in California, and she was brought here to be the facilitator, to run the entire show. But secondly, what really alarmed us was when they finally released the names of the individuals, the who, that would be reviewing our old standards, Common Core, and creating a new set of standards. And we were immediately alarmed when we found that 15 out of the 29 members could be readily red flagged as having a pro-Common Core bias. They had either testified against the pause bill and in strong support of Common Core. Some of them worked for the Park Consortium and represented them here in the state of Indiana. Others had signed a petition, and not a single one on the other side. We couldn't find anyone who had testified, in favor of the pause bill, or who had expressed publicly concerns about the Common Core. So that was very, discouraging and alarming when we discovered that. And we were also taken by the built-in bias that existed when they decided to add the National Council of Teacher of English Standards and the National Council of Teacher of Math Standards into the sets that they were reviewing, because those are known to be very philosophically in line with the Common Core. So by throwing them into the mix, we felt it tilted the balance a little bit more. What about the 3 public hearings that were called for in the law? Many of us felt that, at least we'd get our day in court. We had brought national experts as well as teachers from here in Indiana to testify at the State House. But finally, those with the ability and in positions to actually look at the standards were going to get to hear, and we were going to have testimony, sort of like we had in the Senate, but it would be those that would be listening would really take an interest. Well, again, we were disappointed with it to find that they were to be held only 3 business days after the standards, the first draft was released consecutively. So not much time for the public. Each person got 120 seconds, no more. There's no opportunity for some of our experts to testify about the meat and bones. There was no Q&A, so they just sat quietly, and each person could go up and had 3 minutes. And in places where they ran out of people, they would sit in silence rather than allow people to go again or say, you know what, we'll give you 5 minutes because there's not that many people here right now. We've got to sit here for 2 more hours. So that was a disappointment to us. And as you might recall, after that first draft came out and they were panned terribly, we were promised they're going back to the drawing board. You're going to notice a substantial change the next time. And sadly, when draft 2 was released, they again would not release it to the public. That was, equally as panned, and from that point on, everything went on lockdown. Even sitting members of the State Board of Education were not allowed to see interim drafts. They were not allowed to see reports from the national evaluators that we commissioned. So the slides that I really wanted to show you that apparently aren't on there, but were, the other thing we need to do to see, how fair was this, or was it just an accident, or, how upset should we be, is that we compare it to other standards review processes and see how it compares. So the most recent one we had was in 2009. We reviewed our math standards, and we were just simply updating them. They had already been, considered pretty good by most experts nationally and otherwise, and we were just improving them. Now, if you look at the time we spent from the release of draft 1 to when they voted on those standards, it was an entire calendar year. This time we were reviewing math and English language arts, and we were going to allow the same situation to occur in 8 weeks. So we had 1 year last time, crammed into 8 weeks this time. Again, in 2009, the public comment period was 3 months. This time it was much less, it was 3 weeks. The time from which the final draft was released to when the first official vote occurred, I could not find documentation, but we do know it was more than 2 weeks. It could have been 4 weeks, I'm not exactly sure. This time, the final draft was released, and the vote by the roundtable was within 3 business days. And keep in mind that no one had been privy to the interim drafts, the reports by the national evaluators, so it was a very quick timeline. And again, the national evaluators that were commissioned back in 2009 were given 3 to 4 months. Both times they employed them to look at the standards closer to the beginning and then again closer to the end, and each time they gave the evaluators 3 to 4 months. This time evaluators were given 2 weeks. So in my opinion, it was a very, very rushed process compared to previous standards review. Secondly, was it transparent? In 2009, it was transparent. The interim drafts were posted online for everyone to see. This time, anything beyond draft 1 was not posted online. You could, if you were lucky enough to live around Indianapolis, you could go and watch, and if you had a photographic memory, they flashed some standards up on the screen, but for all practical purposes, teachers could not see the standards, in the privacy of their own home and pore over them. That was a change from 2009 when they were very much transparent. And again, as I mentioned, I think State Board of Education members and others, no one was able to see those interim standards. And as far as the National Evaluators Report, we were happy when they invited a few of our allies to give their input, but then we were really disappointed when we found that they were sitting on it. And it wasn't until later, when they finally released them, that we knew why. It was because on both sides of the aisle, they were very, very critical. But again, they released those 3 business days before the vote, and that went for state board members. They didn't get a chance to read this 197 pages of input that was provided. And even shockingly, when I found this out, I was really stunned because we were told that these reports would be used to provide input, and that they were going to be really valuable. And I came to find out that a member of the College and Career Readiness panel that was to be using these said they never distributed them. They kept them in-house in the Indiana Department of Education and CECI. And so she finally asked and was told, you can look at them over your lunch break, which was about 15 minutes. So they brought them out and let her kind of flip through the 197 pages because she personally asked. But none of the members were given copies of the reports by the evaluators. And I found that a real shame because we had a lot of experienced people that worked on those. And again, in 2009, I think I already mentioned that reports were requested at 2 different points. And again, these were not made available. So as far as the role that the evaluators played, I'd say it's very minimal. And so, all that being said, I feel in fairness, if this was a report card, and your students, you'd say, well, it's a group project between, if you want to say CECI and IDOE or Governor Pence and Superintendent Rentz are the students, and you went through and you said, so transparency, I'm sorry, I have to give it an F. International benchmarking, Oh, I forgot to mention, in 2009, we had a 106-page international benchmarking report where they were compared Indiana standards to Japan and Finland. Even though the legislation called for these new standards to be internationally benchmarked, there was not an international benchmarking done in any way, shape, or form. They just ignored that part. So that was a substantial difference between our previous review and what happened. So, essentially, in my opinion, this was the most rushed, the least transparent, the least vetted by, outside independent people in the history of Indiana standards reviews. And for something that had, caught the attention of the public and that was this big of a controversy, I feel that it was a real shame and did not do a service to the citizens of Indiana in the spirit of the law. It is not what any of us expected. So I told you I'd get to some good news, and there is some good news, and that is, as I said, other states are picking up where Indiana left off. Oklahoma passed legislation, they'll be reviewing their standards, and they had the good sense to return to their previous standards. That's what Indiana should have done. As many of you probably remember, what started this was when we were shocked that Indiana had a set of standards that were rated as clearly superior to the Common Core by Fordham Institute, a pro-Common Core foundation. So we had a good set of standards, and we were always, perplexed as to why we would want to drop down. So again, Oklahoma had the good sense to return to their prior standards. And if you're following, Governor Jindal went to court this week to try to defend, his efforts to withdraw Louisiana from their consortium, and he's making some really strong statements. Apparently he saw his son's math homework and was as irritated as Aaron and I were, and parents all across Indiana are. And he's made some really positive comments that indicate he understands this is not just about federalism. This is about the content of what's coming home in our children's backpack. And sadly, I think that's something that was lost, frankly, on some of those in positions to do something about it here in Indiana. But the really big and exciting news broke this week with two sets of polls that came out. The first poll that came out earlier in the week was an Education Next poll. Found, again, opposition to Common Core across the board has gone up dramatically since this time last year, and support for it has gone down. And, the demographic that had the greatest loss of support for Common Core in the last year, 30 percentage points, which I consider pretty big, is the very one most familiar and closest to it. It's classroom teachers. And those is a group that's not known to be, ultra-conservative, right-wing, Tea Party people. Those are people that know what's happening in the classrooms all across America, and they've been with it long enough to starting to see they don't like it. The second poll that came out, the PDK Gallup poll that was just released, again confirmed, this time last year, the number of people that oppose Common Core in every demographic has gone up. And they found that 76% of registered Republicans oppose it and 60% of independents oppose it. And so now, it's a game changer because, I think it was naturally, politicians were starting to pay attention to it, people were learning about it, but when you see a poll like that, it's a pretty strong indication that they're going to have to listen. It's getting worse. And when you consider that this is a movement that was started and has been run by people with no funding, nothing except the best interest of their children at heart, and we've been up against groups that have millions upon millions of dollars, I think it's pretty exciting, actually, in spite of the situation here in Indiana. And so when we began this 2 years ago, Aaron and I didn't know where it was going to go. We certainly never knew we'd end up having a website or go around talking about this issue. We just felt the need to get the truth out. We felt the need to get the truth out. And so I'm kind of at that point where we began. I feel the need to set the record straight and get the truth out. Because the truth of the matter is, as I said before, if this was a report card, I'd say across the top it'd be stamped, repeat. Because the objectives that were set out by the legislature and the citizens of Indiana were not met this last session by what happened. So with that, again, the only other positive bit of news is that according to my insider DC friends, it's definitely being talked about that our governor may have presidential aspirations or may be encouraged to run. And if that occurs, I do think he's going to have to consider, what this situation is going to cost him. Because as I indicated, those polls, if he heads to New Hampshire or he heads to Iowa, where I promise you the grassroots is more on fire than the grassroots here, he probably won't get a warm welcome. So I'm hopeful that perhaps with, the truth being set free, we'll have another shot at it. Between now and December is a long time and a lot could happen. What that'll be, I'm not quite sure.
Heather, you got time for two
Sure.
quick questions?
Sure.
I got multiple. I'm sorry, Heather. I've been from Carnesville. We've said that several times. Okay. First of all, under this new program, I will say the new program, is homeschoolers exempt or is private schools exempt from the new Indiana standards?
Homeschoolers have always been exempt. It's a concern. David Coleman, the architect of the Common Core, is also the president of the College Board, and so he's rewriting the SAT to align with the Common Core. So that's a concern. And the history,
The history and science books, are they coming out? Is Indiana buying those too now that
the
they're...
science, to my knowledge, has not come on the agenda. I do know that Indiana seriously downgraded their social studies standards earlier this year. Andrea Neal tried very hard to get the word out, and she voted against them, and she teaches history in 8th grade, and that's a real shame. But regarding the private schoolers, Aaron and I, our children are in Catholic schools, and because we accept vouchers, we are required to take the Common Core assessment. And so as conservatives, I feel like that's an issue that at least needs to be addressed in the legislature. In certain states like Florida, their vouchers don't have the Common Core strings. And Indiana is definitely do. And so that is not really choice. To me, it's kind of like a buyout, if you will. It's less choice. And so I think that's something that people need to discuss. If this is the climate, how much do people, really want to hope their school accepts vouchers, because it comes with a lot of strings.
Okay, my last question, I'm sorry. Talk a little about going down to Texas and being on the Glenbeck program on Common Core and other states. I understood you went to Oklahoma?
No, I've not been to Oklahoma.
Okay, was there other states that you...
Oklahoma passed legislation similar to ours, only they went one step further,
Yes, I
and they went
understand
back to their old standards.
But have you been to other states talking to them?
Yeah, I've been invited, not over the summer I haven't. I'm heading to St. Louis in September, and in the past I've been invited to Florida, North Carolina, and they've got a big movement there. I've been gone there a couple times.
And what about the Glenbeck?
And the Glenbeck show is really interesting, really fun, and I enjoyed it. I was on a panel with Dana Lesh, and I loved the fact that it was completely impromptu. We did not have it scripted in any way, shape, or form, and I was so excited that we basically had the freedom to say what was ever on our minds. I didn't have a lot of time, but I appreciated that what I did. I was allowed to say whatever I wanted, and I really... There were a lot of people from all over the country in the audience as well as on the panels, and there was a lot of positive energy at that event. So,
keep in touch with those people then at all?
I'm on an email chain with people all across the country, and so is Aaron and some others in the state. So we keep abreast of what's going on.
Thanks,
They know what's going on here.
Yeah, thanks for everything you've done.
Thank you, Heather. Let's give Heather a great way to keep up with what's going on with Common Core is to go to the Facebook page, Hoosiers Against Common Core. They update that regularly and keep us up to date.
I had a question.
And also on Twitter at Hoosiers No Core. So it's a great way to, if you're on Twitter or Facebook, to follow them and to stay up on the latest Common Core developments. And go ahead, sir.
We got screwed. The governor can't get anybody up there to answer an email or a phone call, such common cold. What do we do next to correct what's been on in this state? I don't care about polls and what other
Right.
states are doing. What are we doing here to correct it?
I mean,
Go ahead.
keep spreading the truth. Call your legislator, write your legislator, ask for an appointment with your legislator. Call, I mean, I don't, you
There's
know,
nobody running against them, so who can I
I'm here, you know, I kind of decided I'm not giving up, and so that's why I left my family tonight to come. I'm not giving up because I don't think justice was served. I don't think, you know, I feel like a lot of politicians think they can, you know, something like this can transpire, they can check the box, done. And if the people let it be done and decide, oh, well, we'll go away, then it is done. But if the people say it's not done, the will of the people has not been served, then eventually they do respond, as we
What
saw.
all of us need to do, the last primary, my district only had 16% of the people vote. It's our job to get those people off their asses and get them out there to vote.
And if you could, I didn't, in the past I had emails that it was kind of a mess, but on our website, if you could subscribe and put your email, it'll alert you when we post something. And during the last 2 sessions, we tried to communicate with everyone about bills that were introduced and legislation, and we will work to try to, you know, get the message out. So you'll either give your email to Brent or subscribe on our page. As I said, it's not over because it hasn't been fixed. And parents, I will say, are up in arms. I mean, we're getting contacted daily, and school hasn't been in very long. But a lot of people, you know, heard the phony message that Common Core was gone, and they're madder, you know, than a hornet's because it's not gone. It lives. So hopefully that will bubble up and the shoe hasn't dropped, I guess.
Thank you, Heather. Appreciate it. Let's give Heather another round.